And you have questions, feel free to go ahead and ask away. It's fine. It's a relatively small group. But here are some things to keep in mind that's going on right now that's going to affect it. Number one trend that I'm seeing a lot of, and for those of you that can't see the PowerPoint from where you are, it's an old guy falling asleep in front of the TV. I just want to let you know. And the first trend is this. Most small business owners I talk to who really know what's going on, they're watching a lot of C-SPAN and a lot less of ESPN. Why? Because there are things going on in Washington right now that affect us right here in Wheeling, West Virginia, just as much as they do in DC or New York. And the number one thing that's affecting us right now is the national debt and the deficit. Because that's going to come down and have an impact on all of our businesses. So smart business guys that I know, when I say guys, I mean guys and girls as well, they're understanding it and they're keeping a close eye on what Washington is doing. So let me explain what I mean by close eye. First, there's the debt. Now, this is a graph, that if you can see this, of gross domestic product. Okay? That's what's being shown there. What's interesting about this graph is that it is showing that the United States has a gross domestic product of $15 trillion. And by the way, for any of you guys who are thinking like, oh my God, China this, China that, and Japan, and India, and Southeast Asia catch up, I just want you to know, like, China's gross domestic product is less than half of what ours are, right? It's a third to a half. Catching up, China's growing at about 9% a year. Ours is growing at about 2%. But we are still way, way, way ahead. Does anybody here from England, out of curiosity? Anybody UK based? Because my wife is from England. And we always have, my wife, she has pretty good teeth. She's from England. We looked at her and we said, look, the United Kingdom here, $2 trillion of gross domestic product compared to the US, which is $15 trillion. It's like not even close. I mean, it's astounding how big a country the US is. So, fact number one, the size of our economy is $15 trillion, okay? That's what we produce. Now, our national debt just hit a milestone, actually just a week ago. Our national debt is $15 trillion. 15 is the magic number. So we are making and producing goods to the total of $15 trillion, but our debt is $15 trillion. And by the way, that's not that crazy a number when you think about it. I mean, we have clients that might have like $1 million or $2 million in revenues, what they're producing, but then they might also have debt of $2 or $3 million, where they're leveraged that way, and they're operating fine because they can handle the debt payments, which is what's going on right now. The US government is handling the debt payments for now. But what's projected to happen is a little bit different. Now, just so you get an idea where we stand at, the US debt is $15 trillion, GDP is $15 trillion, so our debt is 100% of GDP, right? It equals the same. In Greece, and we've been reading about them, I mean, like the price of a gyro is just going out of control, 165% of debt to GDP is what Greece is. So we're at 100%, they're at 165%. Now, 121% close on their heels, as you can see, are our friends in Italy, and 106% of debt to GDP is Portugal. So in Italy, they're also having their budget problems as well. These are all the European countries are in sort of a similar state. But you can see what's happening to Greece trying to service their national debt, Italy trying to service their national debt, they're running into problems. We're not that far behind. But even so, at 100%, is it that big an issue? It's not an issue now, except that right now, the Congressional Budget Office says that our debt over the next 20 to 30 years is going to go up to $44 trillion. So we're at $15 trillion now, but it's supposed to go up to $44 trillion, the way the money is being spent. And our overall gross domestic product, still, it's $15 trillion, but it's not growing anywhere near that same amount. So it's really getting big. It's really getting big. Some people think it's a problem. Other people don't think it's a problem. Paul Krugman, if anyone's ever heard of Paul Krugman, an economist who writes for the New York Times and actually did a great job in getting to the Greek, if you ever see him do the cameo, and that's kind of funny. He wrote just 2 weeks ago saying that no one understands debt. He does not believe that national debt, the national debt that we have, is as big a problem as everybody is making it out to be. And I'm not here to debate him because the guy's way smarter than I am. But that's his side. There are plenty of people that say the national debt is not as big a problem as we expect it to be. Read what he wrote. No one understands debt. But the issue is this. The debt is 15 trillion. Gross domestic product is 15 trillion, and the debt is expected to rise to $44 trillion. So there's the debt, that's what we owe, that's the debt. The other thing is the deficit. And let me just make sure I explain that again for anybody that can or can't see it. Right now, we're running about a $1.3 trillion a year deficit. So that's not necessarily what we owe other people in other countries. It's just sort of the overage of our budget that's been running every year. It's been about $1.3 trillion for the last couple of years. It was only $161 billion back in 2007. But as we got to 2009, 2010, 2011, it's been running at about, it was 1.4 trillion in 2009, 1.3 trillion a year, which is adding to the deficit. So we have a debt problem and we have a deficit problem, if you think that it's a problem or not. And the question is, how do you solve that problem? Because it's going to affect us, and I'm going to explain to you shortly how it will affect us. But how do you solve it? There are 3 ways to solve the problem, at least 3 ways that people are thinking about. Before they even think about solving the problem, though, they have to determine what's causing the problem. And this pie chart, for all of you guys in the back that can't see it, basically says this. It's insurance. The government is spending many dollars on health care. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security takes up 41% of our government spending this year alone. It's not the interest, it's not necessarily the military, which is number 2. It's pretty much insurance is the lion's share of what's being paid. So how do we fix this? How do we fix this deficit problem? Is it that hard to do? Well, a couple things are being tried. Number 1, there was that super committee. Number 2, a balanced budget amendment. And I'm going to talk about number 3 shortly. Number 1, the super committee. Remember that? It was like the 12 really like superstar guys in Congress who all got together to figure out how that we can solve this deficit problem. Their goal was to just cut $1.5 trillion over the next 10 years, right? I mean, we're running a $1.3 trillion deficit each year, but their goal was to cut just $1.5 trillion over the next 10 years, and they couldn't agree to do it. So the result, because they couldn't agree to do it, is automatic cuts. So did the super committee, did they fail? I mean, because they could not, everybody said that they failed. I don't really think that they failed. I think that they came to the conclusion that they couldn't do anything else. So the alternative was just to let these automatic cuts happen. And because the automatic cuts happen, that is cutting the deficit. Because right now, and believe me, things can change, but right now as it is, there's going to be across-the-board cuts to defense, Medicare, and other social programs starting in 2013. So that's number 1. That's what the government's trying to do to cut the deficit. Number 2 is this, is the balanced budget amendment. Now, I have to ask this question, and please, I'm curious to hear what anybody in here thinks. Balanced budget amendment. Right? As anybody who's running a business knows, right? I mean, we're running businesses. So we balance our budgets. You know, I mean, we don't spend what we don't have. If we don't have the money, then so be it. If we can't buy that piece of equipment, we don't buy it. So, you know, when you hear that a balanced budget amendment is being proposed in Washington and it can't get passed, a lot of business owners scratch their heads and go like, why can't it be passed? I don't understand, you know, like, what could, does anybody here know? I mean, you know, because there's valid reasons why there is no balanced budget amendment. And I'm curious to know if anybody here can tell me, like one reason, like, why wouldn't there be a balanced budget amendment? Can anybody tell me? Go ahead.
I'm thinking if you have to go to war, there's some national emergency.
That's exactly right. And what he said is, if you have to go to war or there's some national emergency, right? If you have a balanced budget amendment, there's not enough flexibility. I mean, you hit it, number 1. So, you know, if you said, like, we have to keep it, what if there is some type of big thing? We have to spend $100 billion on something, but it's going to make the budget go out of balance. Oh, well, we can't do that because we have a balanced budget amendment. So that's one of the biggest things that stops the balanced budget amendment is that it's just too inflexible to do. And I got news for you. You know, here I am as a business guy. When somebody explained that to me, you know, that made sense. I was like, oh, okay, I kind of get, now I see. And there are other reasons why a balanced budget amendment is really not that popular. You know, the cuts that would be required to balance our budget would be enormous. I mean, they can't even agree on, you know, $1.5 trillion over the next 10 years we've got a $1.3 trillion deficit this year. Where's the cuts going to come? They're just too giant to do, and people just can't get their arms around them. The process to have a balanced budget is just too long to go through. You have to have 3/5 majority in Congress, and then all the states have to approve it. And then finally, it's a little easy to skirt the rules. I mean, just because you have a balanced budget amendment, it's Washington, so you know what the definition of is, you know what I mean? So whatever happens can be changed and turned around, the different words used. So people feel that it really wouldn't have that much staying power. So we can't have a balanced budget amendment. It's never going to pass.